My mother replaced my father overnight. One day he was my hero, the next morning, his clothes were gone, his photos missing, and a strange man was sitting at our kitchen table like he belonged there. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I came home that Friday evening expecting nothing more than leftovers in the fridge and my dad's bad jokes. College had been exhausting, and I just wanted one normal weekend. The house looked the same from the outside, but the moment I stepped in, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. No sound from the garage. No voice calling my name. I walked into the living room and froze. The family photos were gone. The one of my parents on their anniversary, the one of my dad teaching me how to ride a bike, empty spaces on the wall where they used to hang. I went down the hallway and opened my parents' bedroom door. Half the closet was empty. My father's shoes were missing. His watch was gone from the nightstand. My heart started racing. I called out for him. No answer. Then I heard voices in the kitchen. I walked in and saw my mother sitting at the table, calm, almost relaxed. Across from her sat a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a clean button-down shirt, drinking coffee from my dad's favorite mug. My mother looked up and said, "You're home early." I asked where Dad was. She didn't hesitate. She said the marriage was over. Just like that. No warning. No emotion. She said he left and that it was for the best. Before I could even process that, she turned to the man and said, "This is Mark. He's a friend. He'll be staying with us." Staying with us? Mark gave me a small smile, the kind that felt forced. He didn't stand up. He didn't say much. He just sat there, like he had already decided this was his place. I felt sick. My father didn't just leave. He wouldn't disappear without calling me. He wouldn't leave his things behind like trash. Nothing about this made sense. I asked my mother why no one told me. She said she didn't owe anyone an explanation. She told me to go unpack and rest. That night, I lay awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Every sound in the house felt unfamiliar. The floor creaked differently. The air felt heavier. Somewhere down the hall, I heard quiet laughter that didn't belong there. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. My father didn't leave his family. He was erased. The next morning, I woke up with a tight feeling in my chest. For a few seconds, I hoped everything from the night before had been a bad dream. Then I heard Mark's voice in the kitchen, low and confident, like he had been there forever. Reality settled in. I grabbed my phone and dialed my father's number. It rang once and then stopped. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text. No delivery sign. I walked into the kitchen and asked my mother if she had spoken to him. She didn't even look up from her coffee. She said he chose to leave and that I needed to accept it. That didn't sound like my father. He never walked away from responsibility. I asked if she had blocked his number. She snapped and told me not to accuse her of things I didn't understand. Her tone felt practiced, like she had repeated the same lines before. When she stepped out to take a call, I picked up her phone from the counter. My hands were shaking. I opened her contacts and searched his name. It was there, but blocked. I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. This wasn't abandonment. This was removal. I went outside to the garage, needing air. My dad spent most of his free time there. His tools were his pride. The pegboard on the wall was almost empty. The workbench was clean, too clean. His toolbox was gone. Even the small things, like the radio he always listened to, had vanished. Back inside, I opened the drawer where important papers were usually kept. Insurance folders, manuals, old receipts, gone. The filing cabinet in the office was half empty. I didn't know exactly what was missing, but I could feel that something important had been taken. Mark walked past me and stopped at the doorway like he was checking his territory. He leaned against the frame and asked if everything was okay. His voice carried a quiet confidence that made my skin crawl. When I didn't answer, he smirked and walked away, as if he already knew the truth and enjoyed it. At lunch, my mother repeated the same story. Daniel left. He didn't want the family anymore. She said it without emotion, like reading from a script. When I asked simple questions, she avoided them or changed the subject. I watched her closely. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't angry. She was organized. Calm. Prepared. That was when it hit me. My father hadn't walked out in the middle of the night. Someone had pushed him out and made sure there was no way back. And whoever did it was sitting at the table, smiling like he had won something. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying everything, trying to force the pieces to fit. Early the next morning, before anyone else was awake, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I didn't tell my mother where I was going. I already knew she wouldn't approve. After hours of calling from a borrowed phone and following small clues, I finally found my father parked behind a closed hardware store on the edge of town. His truck was dusty, the windows fogged from the inside. When he stepped out, he looked smaller somehow, like life had pressed him down overnight. He tried to smile when he saw me, but his eyes gave him away. We sat on the curb, saying nothing for a long time. Then he started talking, slowly, like every word hurt. He said he came home from work one evening and found the locks changed. His key didn't work. His clothes were already packed and left on the porch in trash bags. When he tried to call my mother, his calls went unanswered. By morning, the joint bank accounts were empty. Everything he helped build was suddenly out of reach. He told me she had sent him a message through a lawyer, warning him not to come near the house or contact her again. If he did, she would accuse him of harassment and take him to court. He didn't even understand what he had done wrong. One day they were married. The next, he was treated like a stranger. My father kept blaming himself. He said maybe he trusted too easily. Maybe he missed the signs. He looked embarrassed, like he had failed as a husband and as a father. That hurt more than anything. As he spoke, something inside me hardened. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand. This wasn't a mistake. It was too clean. Too fast. Too planned. I asked him if there had been any warning. Any argument. He shook his head. He said my mother had been distant for months but always calm, always smiling. She told him everything was fine. I looked at his hands, rough and cracked from years of work, now empty. He had given his life to that family, and overnight, it was taken from him. In that moment, I stopped seeing my mother as confused or hurt. I saw her as someone who made a decision long before that night. Someone who waited for the right time and acted without mercy. I helped my father get food and filled his tank. When I hugged him goodbye, he held on longer than usual. He told me to be careful. He said I didn't need to choose sides. But I already had. As I drove away, the sadness turned into something sharper. Betrayal still hurt, but anger gave it shape. I wasn't going to accept the story I was given. And I wasn't going to let my father disappear quietly. When I returned to the house, it no longer felt like my home. Mark was everywhere. His shoes were by the door. His jacket hung on the hook my father used for years. He moved through the rooms like he owned them, touching things without asking. The worst part was seeing him wear my father's clothes. The same blue shirt I had seen my dad wear to work 100 times now hung on Mark's shoulders. It fit him almost too well. When he sat in the living room, he chose my father's chair, leaned back, and turned on the TV like it was routine. My mother acted like this was normal. She told me Mark would be around a lot and that I needed to be respectful. She said he was helping her during a difficult time. When I tried to question it, she shut me down fast. She reminded me that it was her house and her rules. At dinner that night, the tension sat heavy on the table. My mother talked about small things, pretending everything was fine. Mark watched me closely, like he was measuring me. Halfway through the meal, he laughed and said my father was weak for leaving the way he did. He said real men don't run. I felt my hands tighten around my fork. Before I could speak, my mother told me to calm down and not cause trouble. She said Mark didn't mean anything by it. That was when I understood my role. I wasn't supposed to ask questions. I was supposed to accept the story they wanted. So I did the opposite, quietly. I started paying attention. I noticed dates that didn't line up in my mother's stories. I saw documents moved from one place to another. I noticed Mark answering calls meant for my mother and giving instructions like he had been there for months. I took pictures when I could. I wrote notes in my phone. I listened more than I spoke. When they talked, they assumed I wasn't paying attention. Outwardly, I agreed with my mother. I nodded when she told me to be civil. I apologized when things got tense. I let Mark believe he had control. Inside, something was building. Every night, I locked my bedroom door and went over what I had seen. This wasn't just a sudden breakup. It was a takeover. Step by step, someone else was replacing my father in every possible way. And the more comfortable Mark became, the more careless he was. That gave me exactly what I needed. It didn't take long for the truth to start showing itself. One afternoon, while my mother and Mark were out, I went into the home office. I wasn't searching randomly anymore. I knew what I was looking for, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. At the back of a drawer, I found old paperwork my father had kept separate from everything else. Some of it was about property. Some of it mentioned an inheritance. The dates caught my attention. The money and land came from my grandfather, years earlier, but the final transfers into joint ownership had only happened recently. That was the first time the pieces started to lock together. My mother had pushed for those changes. I remembered her saying it would simplify things and make the future easier. My father trusted her. He always did. Once everything was shared on paper, he had nothing that was only his anymore. Later that evening, I overheard my mother on the phone. She didn't know I was home. She was calm, confident, talking about accounts and timelines. She mentioned how long they had waited and how careful they had been. There was no sadness in her voice. Only relief. That night, Mark let something slip. He joked about how people get emotional and miss opportunities. He said patience always pays off. My mother laughed, not loudly, but enough. That was when I understood Mark's role. He wasn't a sudden comfort or a rebound. He was part of the plan. He had been there, advising, waiting, helping her move things quietly into place. This wasn't about love or anger. It was about control. The betrayal cut deeper than before. My mother didn't act in the moment. She waited, watched, and chose the perfect time. She waited until the house, the savings, and the property were legally tied together. Then she removed my father like an obstacle. I thought back to every family dinner, every smile, every promise that everything was fine. None of it was real. It was preparation. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. I stopped hoping for explanations. I stopped looking for apologies. I saw the situation clearly, without emotion blurring the edges. They believed the hardest part was over. They believed the plan had worked. They were wrong. Now that I knew the motive, I knew where to look next. And I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. A few days later, my mother finally said what she had been circling around. She told me I needed to make a choice. If I wanted to keep living under her roof, I had to stop seeing my father. No calls. No visits. No questions. She said bringing him up was creating tension and that Mark didn't feel comfortable knowing I was still in contact with him. Her words were calm, but the message was clear. Loyalty had a price. I looked at her and nodded. I told her I understood. I said I didn't want any trouble and that I would respect her wishes. Mark watched me closely, waiting for something in my face to change. When it didn't, he relaxed. From that moment on, I became careful. I acted distant when my father's name came up. I stayed quiet at dinner. I played the role they wanted me to play. But behind their backs, I did the opposite. I began moving things out of the house slowly. Nothing that would be noticed right away. Old documents. Small valuables. Personal items that belonged to my father but were still there. Each time I left the house, I took something with me. I met my father in quiet places and handed him what I could. When I told him what was happening, I expected anger. Instead, I saw something else. Focus. He stopped blaming himself. He stopped apologizing for things he didn't do. The more he understood, the steadier he became. He listened carefully, asked questions, and started writing things down. We talked about doing things the right way. No shouting. No threats. No rushed decisions. Everything would be legal. Clean. Based on facts. For the first time since all of this began, I saw my father stand up straight again. The fear in his eyes faded, replaced by something quiet and strong. He wasn't looking for revenge fueled by emotion. He wanted justice. That changed me too. At home, my mother seemed satisfied. She believed she had control. Mark became more open, more careless with his words. They talked freely, assuming I had chosen their side. They didn't know that every conversation, every comment, every move was helping us. I had made my choice. It just wasn't the one they thought. And whatever was coming next, we would face it together. Once we had enough papers and notes, I helped my father meet with a lawyer. It was a small office, nothing fancy, but the man listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He asked clear questions and took his time reading everything we brought. The change in his expression told me everything. He pointed out signatures that didn't match my father's writing. He explained how certain transfers couldn't have happened without permission. Some forms had dates that made no sense at all. What looked complicated on the surface was actually very simple underneath. Someone had crossed the line. The lawyer told us to stay quiet. He said the worst thing we could do was warn anyone. He would start checking records and preparing the next steps. All we had to do was wait and keep acting normal. Back at the house, my mother and Mark grew more relaxed. Mark started acting like decisions were already his to make. He talked about changes he wanted, plans for the property, and what would be sold. My mother agreed quickly, sometimes too quickly. I noticed Mark's tone shift. He corrected her in front of me. He dismissed her ideas. When she hesitated, he pushed harder. It was subtle, but it was there. Control, not partnership. One evening, I heard raised voices behind a closed door. Mark wanted things done faster. He said waiting was risky. My mother sounded nervous for the first time. She reminded him they needed to be careful. He laughed and said there was nothing to worry about anymore. That was when I saw it clearly. She thought she had replaced one stable life with another. Instead, she had traded safety for pressure. She still believed she was in charge. Mark didn't. At the same time, my father was changing. Every meeting with the lawyer made him more confident. He asked better questions. He understood his rights. The man who had been living day to day was now planning months ahead. The trap was already in place. We didn't need to rush. The more comfortable my mother and Mark became, the more mistakes they made. Every demand Mark made, every rushed decision, pushed them further into a corner. They thought the story was finished. It hadn't even reached the most important part yet. The papers arrived on a quiet afternoon. I wasn't home when it happened, but I could feel the shift the moment I walked through the door. The house felt tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. My mother was sitting at the table, staring at a stack of documents. Her hands were shaking. For the first time since this began, she looked scared. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just kept rereading the same page, like the words might change if she looked long enough. The confidence she had carried for weeks was gone. Whatever story she had been telling herself no longer worked. Mark wasn't there. That alone said enough. He stopped staying late. He stopped talking about plans. When he did come by, he kept his distance, careful with his words. He reminded my mother that she had made her own decisions. That she handled the paperwork. He was suddenly very clear about what wasn't his responsibility. Watching him step back was almost painful. Not because I felt bad for her, but because I could see the realization hitting her all at once. She thought they were a team. He saw her as a shield. That night, I confronted her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I placed the evidence on the table and waited. Copies of documents. Timelines. Facts that couldn't be twisted. She looked at them, then at me, and finally looked away. She didn't deny it. She said she was tired of uncertainty. Tired of worrying about money. Tired of living with someone who trusted too much and planned too little. She said my father was kind but predictable. Safe, but limited. Then she said the part that changed everything. She told me she never loved him the way I thought. She loved the life he provided. The stability. The comfort. When something better appeared, she chose it. She spoke like she was explaining a decision at work. No guilt. No regret. In that moment, I stopped hoping there was more to her. I stopped believing she was confused or manipulated. This was who she was when things got hard. I told her I knew about Mark stepping away. I told her the truth was already moving forward, whether she liked it or not. She asked me if I was proud of myself. I told her I was proud of my father. She didn't respond. As I walked away, I felt strangely calm. There was no sadness left to carry. Just clarity. The story I grew up believing had ended, and a new one had taken its place. Now everything was written down, signed, and moving forward. The truth didn't need emotion anymore. It stood on its own. The decision didn't come with drama. No shouting. No sudden twists. It came in clear words spoken by a judge who had seen everything laid out in order. When it was over, my father's name stood where it always should have been. The accounts were frozen first. Then, one by one, they were returned. Property that had been taken without consent was placed back under his control. What had been rushed and hidden was undone slowly and carefully. My mother didn't speak during most of it. She sat still, her face tight, as if showing emotion would make things worse. Mark never showed up. No calls. No messages. He vanished the moment the risk became real. When the house was listed and the keys were handed over, my mother finally broke. She came to me, not as someone in control, but as someone losing everything. She said she did it for the family. She said she was trying to secure a future. She said I would understand one day. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her the truth. Families aren't built by pushing people out in the dark. Futures aren't secured by lies. What she did wasn't protection. It was betrayal. She cried then. She asked me not to abandon her. She reminded me that she was still my mother. She said blood mattered. I told her trust mattered more. I walked away while she was still talking. My father didn't celebrate. He didn't smile much either. He just breathed easier. The weight he had been carrying was finally gone. He had his name, his work, and his dignity back. Watching him stand in his own space again made everything worth it. That was the moment I understood something important. Revenge doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like the truth being spoken and accepted. The story my mother built collapsed under its own weight. Not because we pushed it down, but because it was never strong to begin with. And once it fell, there was no one left to blame but herself. After everything was settled, life slowly started to feel real again. My father didn't rush into anything. He didn't seek revenge or try to punish anyone. He simply began rebuilding what was rightfully his. The house, the accounts, the property, they were back under his name. More than that, he reclaimed his dignity. He took small steps at first. Fixing things around the house, organizing his work, reconnecting with old friends. There was no rush, no pressure. I watched him and felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Not loud or dramatic, but steady. He smiled again, not the forced smile he had worn when trying to hide fear, but the real one I remembered from my childhood. I had choices too. I could continue to engage with my mother, argue with her, or try to make her understand. But I realized nothing would change her. She had made her decisions, and she had to live with them. I chose silence over conflict. I cut contact, not out of hatred, but to protect my own peace. I had a father to support and a life to rebuild. My mother was left alone. Mark had vanished. The house was empty, quiet, and cold. No one came to comfort her. No one tried to replace what she lost. She had expected someone to share in her plans, to validate her actions, but instead, she had nothing. No friends, no partner, no family who could trust her again. Sometimes, I thought about what she had done. She traded trust, love, and loyalty for a false sense of control. She believed she was smart, careful, untouchable. But in the end, she was the one who lost everything that actually mattered. The house, the money, even the respect of her own child, gone. I didn't feel joy at her loss. That wasn't the point. The point was clarity. Actions have consequences. Choices shape the life you live, and you cannot cheat them away. Danielle started over slowly but with purpose. We rebuilt routines, laughed over old memories, and even created new ones. The future wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That was worth more than any inheritance or material possession. And me? I stayed close to my father, helping when I could, learning what real loyalty and strength meant. I learned that people who truly care for you don't abandon you for comfort or greed. And those who replace loyalty with selfishness always pay the price in the end. Sometimes I think about my mother, about the life she tried to take. But I don't feel anger anymore. I feel relief. Relief that the story ended with truth, not lies. Relief that my father got justice, and relief that I got to see what matters most: integrity, love, and trust. In the quiet of that life, I understood it clearly: when you replace loyalty with greed, you lose everything that actually mattered. And nothing can fill the space left behind except the consequences you chose to face alone.